One of the truest ways to test one's writing capability is to look at how they approach telling a story that was diegetically authored by one of their characters. In order to do this right, they have to have a complete understanding of their character's inclination for storytelling, including how creative and articulate they are, but also how they might approach delivering the tale stylistically and thematically within the context of the scene, in relation to the broader implications of the plot. Okay, so what the hell am I talking about? I'll use some examples. If you've seen the show The Boys, you're probably familiar with how Huey often gets his point across by referencing previous experiences he's had that relate analogically to the topic of conversation. In the earlier seasons, it tended to work pretty well because he would bring up things that we as the audience were actually there for. And through Huey's interpretation, we are given additional perspective that wasn't necessarily present for our initial third-person frame of reference. However, it's apparent that they ran out of meaningful plot points for Huey and Annie to discuss all throughout Season 5, because every scene with just the two of them talking is agony. They enter these conversations with what seems by the end to have been a pointless concern, seeing as how it is always quickly diffused with some dumbass anecdote about an event that the viewer never actually witnessed. It kind of feels like when a friend of a friend is telling an inside joke and you're the only one who doesn't get it. The simple yet effective solution when you run into this problem is to use a flashback, which is most often done on large scales like in the Lorax. This stylistic approach is sort of genius in its own way, and it displays a potent sense of contrast between the present story, told by the Lorax through Ted's perspective, and the flashback, told by the Onceler through the perspective of his past self, whom he intentionally portrays lacking major character development. That being said, there are certainly instances when a character is a believably good enough storyteller to avoid needing this crutch, like Michael Caine's Alfred in The Dark Knight. In the scene where Bruce analyzes the mob's Hail Mary attempt at eliminating Batman by employing the Joker, Alfred responds to his dismissal of criminals not being complicated with a compelling narrative, hoping to break through Bruce's stubborn generalizations with a concrete rebuttal. Alfred is familiar with how Bruce's mind works, and obviously knows why his opinions of mob affiliates are so closed off, despite him being otherwise sharp and reasonable. Not only does he provide cause for reconsideration, but he also weighs in on how to neutralize the imposing threat.
In the forest in Burma. Did you catch him?
Yes.
How?
We burned the forest down.
Man, gotta love Alfred. Good storytelling can also present itself through creative artistic liberties taken by the narrator, which often builds characterization in the process by showing the viewer just how credible they actually are. For example, what does Squint's fantastical tale of the Beast from The Sandlot tell us about his character? That he constantly talks out of his ass, which the ending confirms, but also that he loves to thrill and entertain, and that he will definitely get his moment in the spotlight before the movie's over. Of course, this can be done using fiction as well. Just look at Stand By Me. On the surface, the purpose of Gordy's story about Lardass Hogan was to demonstrate his abilities as a future author. But if you consider how he poses his main character as this beaten-down anti-hero right at the climax of a hastily exposited revenge flick, it becomes clear that Lardass is a reflection of Gordy's escapist desires and indicates a realization that he's an outcast, even among his closest friends. Also, nearly this entire movie is a flashback, so technically it's a story within a story within a story. The backwards strategy for this immersion tactic is to remind the audience that the character being played by an actor is not an actor themselves, which explains how shitty Tim Roth was at narrating the beginning of the Commode story in Reservoir Dogs. It's because Mr. Orange is not an actor. He's an undercover cop, and despite all the coaching he gets, the story still comes out sloppy, which showcases that the character is nervous as hell. Luckily, Tarantino quickly turns it into a scene, and thank God, because it's one of the best scenes in the entire movie, and actually the inspiration for this video. But I have to say, in my opinion, the greatest ever telling of a story within a story is The Tragedy of Charles Grady by Mr. Ullman in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Watch.
Well, my predecessor in this job hired a man named Charles Grady as the winter caretaker. And he came up here with his wife and two little girls, I think about 8 and 10. And he had a good employment record, good references. And from what I've been told, I mean, he seemed like a completely normal individual. But at some point during the winter, he must have suffered some kind of a complete mental breakdown. He ran amok and he killed his family with an axe. Stacked them neatly in one of the rooms of the West Wing, and then he put both barrels of a shotgun in his mouth. Police, I thought that it was what the old-timers used to call cabin fever.
Well, you can rest assured, Mr. Ullman, that's not going to happen with me.
Jack. It's a horror movie.